It was a humid summer afternoon in 1985 when 7-year-old Amanda Whitmore vanished without a trace from a quiet suburban neighborhood in Athens, Georgia. One moment, she was playing hopscotch with her older brother in their driveway. The next, she was gone, her shoes still resting at the edge of the pavement, one sock twisted oddly at the heel as if she had stepped out of them in a hurry. There were no screams, no struggle, no witnesses, just a child evaporated into thin air. Amanda's disappearance stunned the small southern town. Her face, framed with curly strawberry blonde hair and dimples that seemed to always linger, soon became a fixture on every telephone pole, gas station window, and nightly news segment across the state. Missing, Amanda Whitmore, age 7. Last seen wearing a yellow sundress and white sandals. The nation watched, heartbroken, as her mother, Carol, stood behind microphones begging for her daughter's safe return. Her father, Jim, a high school biology teacher, clutched Amanda's stuffed rabbit in one hand during every press conference, refusing to let go of what he called her last breath of comfort. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and by Christmas of that year, the Whitmore house stood silent. No lights, no tree, no presents, only the echo of a family splintering under the weight of unanswered prayers. The police had theories, some logical, others wild. Maybe she'd wandered off into the woods and was never found. Maybe she was taken by someone who had been watching her for weeks. A few speculated about a traveling carnival that had passed through town that same weekend. But as leads dried up, so did hope. Amanda's case grew cold. Her school desk stayed empty. Her birthday cakes were still baked but never eaten. And then, 8 years later, in the spring of 1993, over 600 miles away, in a small town outside Chicago, something happened that made everyone freeze. A high school librarian was flipping through yearbook proofs when she paused. Page 78, third row, fourth column. The face, the same smile, the same dimple on her left cheek. A girl named Rebecca Lorne, but the resemblance was undeniable. It didn't make sense. Amanda Whitmore, declared legally dead just 2 years earlier, was staring back from a black-and-white photograph, alive, older, and apparently living an entirely different life. What followed would unravel everything the Whitmore family, the police, and the public thought they knew about that hot summer day in 1985. Was Amanda taken? Did she escape? Who was Rebecca, really? And most haunting of all, how could a little girl slip into a new identity right under the nation's watchful eye? This is the story of a mystery that never wanted to be solved, a name forgotten, then remembered, a photo buried in time, then uncovered by chance, and a family caught between hope and heartbreak that would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it stares back at you. July 18th, 1985 began like any other Thursday for the Whitmore family. The sun had risen early over Athens, Georgia, casting long streaks of orange light across the front lawn. Carol Whitmore was in the kitchen, scrambling eggs and flipping through the local newspaper. Her husband, Jim, was sipping coffee on the porch, his lesson plans for the new school year spread out beside him. Amanda, their youngest, was already out front, barefoot, hopping back and forth on the chalk-drawn squares of her hopscotch game. She'd always get up before her brother, Carol would later say, her voice cracking. Amanda had this little ritual. She'd whisper to herself, "I get the first wish today," before she jumped. I think she believed the morning gave her more magic. Amanda was a bright, energetic child, curious, always asking questions that caught adults off guard. She loved making up stories about faraway places and had recently become obsessed with drawing invisible maps that led to buried treasure she claimed was hidden in the woods behind the park. At just 7 years old, she had the kind of imagination that adults wistfully admired. until it turned into something they couldn't understand. That morning, her 10-year-old brother, Daniel, eventually came outside to join her. The two played until around 10:30 a.m. when Carol called them inside for a snack. Amanda ran up the steps, scarfed down half a banana, and said she wanted to go ride her bike up and down the street for 10 loops before it got too hot. Carol nodded. "Amanda wasn't the kind of kid you worried about," Carol said. "She was cautious. She never went further than the stop sign at the end of the street. I could see her the whole time from the kitchen window." Except that morning, Carol got distracted. The phone rang. A neighbor stopped by unexpectedly. 20 minutes passed, and when Carol glanced out the window again, Amanda was gone. At first, she didn't panic. Maybe Amanda had gotten off her bike and gone into the neighbor's yard, or maybe she'd gone around the corner chasing a dog or a butterfly like she did once before. But after 5 minutes of calling her name, "Amanda, Amanda, it's time to come in," and hearing nothing, a cold chill settled in Carol's chest. She walked up and down the street, her voice growing louder with each passing minute. "Amanda, this isn't funny. Come out now." Her bike was found just beyond the curb, tipped over in the grass near the edge of a small wooded patch. One sandal lay beside it as if she had been mid-stride, but there were no signs of a struggle, no tire tracks, no voices, nothing. Jim joined the search within minutes, then Daniel, then neighbors. Within an hour, police were at the scene, canvassing the area. Bloodhounds were brought in. Helicopters hovered over the tree line. Local TV stations interrupted daytime programming with a breaking news banner. "Missing child, Amanda Whitmore, age 7. Detective Harold Gaines, a seasoned officer with 18 years on the force, took lead on the case. "We treated it as an abduction from the start," he said. "Children that age don't just disappear mid-morning in their own neighborhood. Somebody saw something, but nobody had. Or at least, nobody admitted they had. Interviews were conducted with every house within a 5-block radius. One elderly woman claimed to have seen a tan-colored sedan idling near the corner earlier that morning, but couldn't recall the license plate or driver. Another neighbor swore they heard a high-pitched scream, but they were watching a soap opera at the time and couldn't tell if it came from outside or the TV. The town of Athens went into lockdown. School events were canceled. Park visits were discouraged. "Have you seen this child?" Posters were distributed to every county in the state. The FBI got involved. So did the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Carol and Jim were questioned, over and over, about their marriage, their routines, their finances. Police asked them if Amanda had been abused, if she had run away, if she had been sick. Every angle was explored. Every question became sharper, more desperate. Jim lashed out once at a reporter who implied that the family had staged it all for attention. "You think I'd fake my daughter's disappearance to get on the news? You think this is what I want to remember every time I look out that window?" He snapped, his voice raw. Despite their grief, the Whitmores became the public face of the search. They held candlelight vigils. They appeared on America's Most Wanted. Amanda's story aired nationally. Tips came flooding in, sightings in Atlanta, in Tennessee, even as far as Oregon. But every lead collapsed under scrutiny, and Amanda's room remained untouched. Her favorite stuffed animals lined her bed, still perfectly arranged in the pattern she liked. Her diary, filled with childlike entries about unicorns and secret fairy kingdoms, remained on her nightstand. Carol read it over and over, looking for some hidden meaning, some clue that had gone unnoticed. Weeks passed, then months, and eventually the media moved on. Other stories took priority. New tragedies, new faces. By the time Amanda's 8th birthday arrived, the Whitmore home felt like a museum, frozen in time. The cake Carol baked sat untouched on the counter. Daniel, now withdrawn, avoided the front porch where he once played with his sister. and Jim stopped bringing home flowers for the table. On July 18th, 1986, a full year to the day since she vanished, the family held a private memorial. Carol lit a single candle and whispered, "If you're out there, please come home." But Amanda didn't come home, and by 1987, the search was no longer active. The FBI closed their file, the media archived their footage, and a small-town tragedy faded into the background noise of a noisy world. Amanda Whitmore was just another name on a growing list of children who vanished without explanation, and for nearly a decade, that's all she remained. In the months following Amanda's disappearance, the Whitmore house became both a sanctuary and a shrine, preserving the last moments of normalcy in a world that had shattered. Carol couldn't bring herself to wash Amanda's laundry. Her yellow sundress, the one she was last seen wearing, remained folded on her bedroom chair. The scent of her shampoo still lingered faintly in the hallway. Jim, though silent most days, would sit on the porch every evening with a flashlight in one hand and Amanda's favorite bedtime storybook in the other. The Secret Garden. Neighbors did their best to be supportive, but the pain that clung to the family became heavy, even from a distance. One by one, those who'd offered casseroles and comfort stopped calling. Friends avoided eye contact in grocery store aisles. Even Daniel's friends stopped inviting him over. Grief had made the Whitmores into strangers. And for Carol, the hardest part wasn't the silence or the sorrow. It was the not knowing. She could have fallen. She could have been taken. She could be alive. She could be dead. And you don't know what face to wear in the morning, Carol later told a local journalist. Hope is the heaviest thing you can carry when there's no proof. Despite the closure of the official investigation, Jim didn't stop searching. He turned the basement into a makeshift command center. Wall maps of Georgia and neighboring states were pinned with red pushpins. He tracked known sex offenders. He studied traffic camera reports. He attended missing persons conferences in other states, hoping someone might have seen something, anything, that resembled Amanda. Daniel, meanwhile, retreated inward. At just 10 years old, he carried the guilt of being the last person to see his sister. He replayed their final conversation over and over in his head. "She asked if I wanted to go with her," he later recalled in a rare interview. "I told her no. I wanted to finish my game. I didn't even say goodbye." The town of Athens slowly moved on. New families moved into the neighborhood. The hopscotch squares on the sidewalk faded with time, never redrawn. The woods where Amanda's bike was found were eventually cleared to make space for a new housing development. All that remained was a small plaque at the edge of the park, installed by the community in 1988. It read, "In memory of the missing, Amanda Whitmore, forever in our hearts." But memory is a fragile thing, and by the early 1990s, Amanda's story was nearly forgotten, until an unexpected encounter reopened old wounds. In 1992, a retired detective named Walter Hayes, who had worked briefly on Amanda's case before moving to Illinois, was giving a guest lecture at a high school criminal justice class near Chicago. After the session, he wandered the halls of the school, noting the students' art projects, their photos, their spirit banners, and then he paused at the yearbook display case. A recent edition of the school's yearbook had been opened to a random page. On it, row after row of junior class portraits smiled back at him. But one face stood out, the girl's eyes, her jawline, her dimple. He didn't recognize her name, Rebecca Lorne, but he recognized her face. "It hit me like lightning," Hayes recalled. "I hadn't seen Amanda's face in years, but something about that girl. My gut told me it was her. She looked older, of course, but there was something hauntingly familiar." He didn't act immediately. He took a photo of the yearbook page with a disposable camera and went home that night flipping through his old notes from the Amanda Whitmore case. The similarities were uncanny. and the birth date listed for Rebecca Lorne on the school's emergency contact form matched Amanda's exactly, July 12, 1978. He filed a quiet report with local law enforcement and forwarded it to the Athens PD. The officers who remained from the original investigation were skeptical. "After so many years, we'd seen dozens of supposed matches," said Officer Len Harris, now retired. "But this one felt different." A request was sent to the high school for access to Rebecca's school records. Meanwhile, Carol and Jim were contacted, gently, cautiously. They were told there might be a lead and asked if they would be willing to submit updated DNA samples just to rule it out. Carol didn't sleep that night. She sat in Amanda's room, holding the yellow sundress to her chest, whispering, "Please, please, let it be her." The samples were sent. A discreet surveillance team was assigned to observe Rebecca from a distance. She was quiet, polite, well-liked by her peers, lived with a single woman named Margaret Lorne, who worked nights as a nurse. The two had moved to town only 4 years earlier. There was no birth certificate on file prior to that, no medical history, no clear origin. Then one day, Rebecca came into the nurse's office with a small injury, a scraped knee from gym class. The attending nurse, unaware of the investigation, cleaned her up and tossed the bloodied gauze in the medical waste bin. Authorities retrieved it within hours, and 2 weeks later, the results came back. A Kielens Egges, Kielens het Shazad Shazalik match. Rebecca Lorne was Amanda Whitmore. The revelation that Rebecca Lorne was, in fact, Amanda Whitmore sent shockwaves through both the Athens community and the Chicago suburb she had quietly lived in for nearly a decade. But to understand how such a transformation had even been possible, investigators had to go back through the long, winding, frustrating years of a cold case that many had quietly given up on. When Amanda disappeared in 1985, the initial investigation was rapid and widespread. Law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly in those early months, pursuing every lead, questioning every neighbor, and chasing tips that came in from across the Southeast. But as time passed, enthusiasm faded and reality set in. By 1987, 2 years in, the FBI had reassigned its agents, and the local task force had been reduced to just 2 part-time detectives. Detective Harold Gaines, who had once vowed to find Amanda, if it was the last thing he ever did, was transferred to a different department in 1988 after burnout and personal tragedy overtook his resolve. "That case haunted me," he would later admit in a podcast interview, "because we had no evidence, not even a breadcrumb. It was like she was plucked off this earth." Over the years, false leads kept the case flickering like a stubborn candle in the wind. In 1989, a waitress in Birmingham called in a tip claiming she had seen a girl matching Amanda's description dining with an older couple. When detectives rushed to the scene, the family had already left. Security footage, grainy and nearly useless, showed a young red-haired girl, but it was inconclusive. Then, in 1990, another lead came in from a woman in Knoxville who was convinced her neighbor's adopted daughter was Amanda. The girl bore a resemblance, and there were inconsistencies in her paperwork, but DNA ruled it out. These bursts of hope always ended the same way, with silence, with tears, with apologies. For the Whitmores, these false leads took a devastating emotional toll. "I used to keep a suitcase packed by the door," Carol once said in a televised interview. "Every time the phone rang, I'd grab it thinking, 'This is it, she's been found.' And every time, I had to unpack it again." Daniel struggled too. His teen years were marked by depression, quiet rebellion, and a desperate search for identity. He couldn't bear to talk about Amanda, couldn't bear to be the one who stayed behind. By 1991, Jim and Carol had separated. Though they insisted it was amicable, friends close to the family said the disappearance had built a wall between them. They grieved differently, one friend recalled. Carol clung to hope. Jim shut down. They couldn't find their way back to each other. But amidst the pain and distance, Amanda's memory endured, preserved in scrapbooks, in a chest of her drawings, in a few precious home videos that Carol would play late at night when she couldn't sleep. Online sleuthing communities began to emerge in the early 90s, small forums where strangers shared theories about unsolved cases. Amanda's story occasionally surfaced there, sparking debates and amateur investigations. Some believed she had been taken by a family member. Others theorized she had been abducted by a traveling preacher who had passed through town around the same time. One theory, dismissed at the time as far-fetched, suggested Amanda had been stolen and raised under a different identity, a theory that, in hindsight, was far closer to the truth than anyone realized. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Rebecca was living what appeared to be a normal life. She was quiet but academically gifted, participated in school plays, loved art, and always drew scenes of forests and cottages, imagery that, when seen later, eerily resembled the woods near where Amanda had disappeared. Her teachers described her as bright but reserved, and her friends said she was loyal but hard to get close to. Margaret Lorne, her mother, told the school that Rebecca had been homeschooled until the age of 9 and had only recently begun attending public school due to her job schedule. The explanation seemed plausible, especially since Margaret was well-liked, worked long hours as a night nurse, and kept mostly to herself. No one ever questioned it, but there were cracks. Rebecca had no extended family, no baby photos. She flinched at the sound of sirens. She had nightmares that woke her screaming, and she once told a school counselor that she didn't believe in birthdays. When asked why, she simply said, "Because they don't feel like they belong to me." The counselor made a note. No one followed up. Back in Athens, by 1993, Amanda's case had long been relegated to a dusty box in the basement of the local precinct. Occasionally, new detectives would skim the file, hoping to cut their teeth on something big. But there was no movement, no new evidence, just the same unanswered questions and fading hope, until that day in the Chicago high school hallway. When Detective Walter Hayes sent in the initial report, it reignited a small ember, and when DNA confirmed the impossible, everything changed. But the question remained. How had Amanda ended up so far away? Why had no one noticed? And, most haunting of all, what happened during those missing years? Investigators turned their attention to Margaret Lorne, whose real name, they would soon learn, was not Margaret at all. The woman who called herself Margaret Lorne had no criminal record, no traffic tickets, no signs of trouble in any system. She paid taxes, donated to charity. Her neighbors described her as kind, quiet, and dedicated to her job at St. Jude's Medical Center. But when authorities began digging, the cracks in her story widened with every turn. Her nursing license, while technically valid, had been obtained under falsified documentation. The name Margaret Lorne didn't appear in any birth records. No high school, no college, no childhood medical history. It was as if she had stepped into the world at 30 years old and taken a child with her. Through fingerprint tracing and archived employment applications, investigators discovered her real name, Elaine Rourke, a woman who, back in the 1970s, had briefly worked at a daycare center in Tennessee before being dismissed for inappropriate behavior. No charges had ever been filed, but whispers had lingered. In 1980, Elaine had legally changed her name after moving to Georgia. She had no known family, no close friends. She had moved frequently in her early years, Tennessee, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and in 1985 she was living in Athens. She'd rented a small home just 3 blocks from the Whitmores under the name M. Lorne. A quiet tenant paid rent on time, kept to herself. Most of the neighbors hardly remembered her. One vaguely recalled seeing a woman walking with a child in the mornings, but couldn't recall if it was Amanda. Elaine vanished from that neighborhood less than a week after Amanda disappeared. Investigators now had what they needed to make an arrest. In early 1993, a team of officers approached Elaine, still going by Margaret, at her workplace. She was escorted outside without incident. As she was being placed in the back of the cruiser, she turned to the officers and said calmly, "She's my daughter. I saved her. You don't understand." The interrogation was long. Elaine claimed she had never kidnapped Amanda. She had rescued her. She insisted Amanda had been crying in the woods, alone, scared, abandoned. Elaine said she took her home, fed her, and protected her because she believed Amanda's family had left her behind. It was delusional. Prosecutors described Elaine's version of events as an elaborate defense mechanism, a story she'd rehearsed in her mind so many times it had become real to her. In reality, evidence pointed to premeditation. Witnesses near the neighborhood recalled seeing a tan-colored sedan with out-of-state plates idling for several days near the Whitmore's home, matching the vehicle Elaine had owned at the time. Police found Amanda's original birth certificate, along with forged school records and doctored medical forms, locked in a safe in Elaine's basement. When confronted with the DNA results and the mounting evidence, Elaine broke down. "I just wanted a daughter," she reportedly said. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't mean for it to go this far." The trial began in the fall of 1993. Elaine was charged with kidnapping, identity fraud, and child endangerment. The courtroom was packed every day, a media circus swelling around one of the most shocking cases of the decade. Amanda, now 15, appeared in court only once, escorted by child psychologists and wearing a hoodie that obscured most of her face. The judge allowed her testimony to be given via closed session to protect her identity. Carol sat in the courtroom daily, gripping the edge of her seat. Jim, now divorced but present, said little. Daniel refused to attend, still struggling to process the truth. But the most heartbreaking revelation came not from the prosecution, but from Amanda herself. In her private testimony, she revealed that for the first few years of her new life, she had been told her real parents were dead. Elaine, she said, had convinced her she was adopted after being orphaned in a car crash. She told Amanda that people would come pretending to be her family, trying to take her away, and that they were bad. It was all Amanda had known. "She wasn't cruel," Amanda reportedly said. "She was just broken. She thought she was saving me." Amanda remembered little about the day she vanished. Only fragmented images, running through trees, a car door slamming, a voice saying, "You're safe now." Experts testified that Amanda had likely experienced dissociation, a common psychological response in young children undergoing trauma. Over time, as she adjusted to her new life, the old one became like a dream, vague, distant, easily rewritten. Elaine Rourke was found guilty on all charges. She was sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of parole. But even as justice was served, the emotional wreckage remained. Amanda didn't go home to Georgia immediately. In fact, she didn't go home at all. She remained in state custody while a team of psychologists, counselors, and child protection officials determined the best path forward. Carol and Jim, though overjoyed their daughter was alive, were effectively strangers to her. "She didn't remember us," Jim said. "How do you tell your daughter you've been looking for her every day when she sees you as a stranger?" Amanda was placed in a transitional living program for older teens, far from media attention and under a different name. She agreed to maintain contact with her biological family, but needed time, space, healing. Carol understood. "She's alive. That's all I ever prayed for," she said. "Even if she doesn't come home today, at least I know she can Someday. Meanwhile, the community of Athens held a candlelight vigil, not in mourning this time, but in reflection. Hundreds attended. Some brought photos, some brought signs. One simply held a poster that read, "Welcome home, Amanda." But even as the candles flickered in the night, one question remained unanswered. How could a little girl disappear in broad daylight, and no one see a thing? The year was 1993. Amanda Whitmore was alive. The news alone was earth-shattering, an emotional tidal wave for a family who had mourned, hoped, grieved, and then grieved again. But while headlines across the country celebrated the discovery, the real story, the full, aching truth of how the revelation unfolded, was even more surreal than the public knew. It began not with law enforcement, but with a librarian. Her name was Mrs. Evelyn Sharp, a kind, silver-haired woman who had been working at Glenfield High School in suburban Chicago for over 30 years. She knew every shelf, every yearbook, and most of the students by name. On a quiet afternoon in March of 1993, she was preparing a display of old yearbooks for the school's upcoming Throwback Week. She had stacked several editions by decade, carefully flipping through pages to check for damage or wear. As she thumbed through the 1993 yearbook, she paused. There, in the third row of the junior class portraits, was a familiar face. Not familiar in the typical small-town way, but hauntingly familiar. Evelyn couldn't place where she'd seen the girl before, but something about her image seemed out of time, out of place. The student's name was listed as Rebecca Lorne. Later that night, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling. At home, she poured herself a cup of chamomile tea, turned on her old box television, and sat with a stack of unsorted newspaper clippings she often used for her personal scrapbooks. Among them was an old missing persons section she'd clipped from a 1980s true crime magazine, one she hadn't looked at in years. She flipped through the yellowed pages and froze. A small, grainy photo stared back at her. Same soft features, same large eyes, same dimple on the left cheek. Amanda Whitmore, missing since 1985. Heart pounding, Evelyn returned to the school the next morning and pulled the yearbook again. This time, she showed it to the school's assistant principal, Mr. Dalton, who had once worked in law enforcement before entering education. He looked from the yearbook photo to the clipping Evelyn brought in, then back again, and didn't say a word for several seconds. Within days, the local police were discreetly contacted, and the name Rebecca Lorne was flagged in several systems. Nothing came up. No Social Security records prior to 1989, no official birth certificate on file before age 10. Her school records stated she had been homeschooled in the early years and enrolled at Glenfield only 3 years earlier. Curiosity turned to alarm. An anonymous request for further investigation was sent to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They ran Rebecca's image through facial recognition software, still in its early development at the time. The match, though not legally conclusive, was flagged with high probability. Amanda Whitmore. Likely match, 89%. That same week, retired Detective Walter Hayes, now a part-time guest lecturer at a community college nearby, was brought in to consult. Walter had worked the Whitmore case in the 1980s and still kept a small file of unsolved cases in his attic. When he saw the side-by-side photos, he didn't hesitate. "I've looked into the eyes of that missing girl 100 times, he told officers. "That's her. I'd bet my badge on it." But there was still one step left: confirmation. DNA. Authorities decided to act carefully. A warrant was quietly secured for DNA collection from Rebecca. But rather than alarming her, they waited for the opportunity to collect a sample indirectly. It came the following week, when Rebecca scraped her knee during gym class. The school nurse, unaware of the growing investigation, cleaned the wound and discarded the bloodied gauze. Within hours, it was retrieved and sent to a lab. In parallel, officers reached out to Carol and Jim Whitmore, gently explaining that a possible lead had emerged and asking for fresh DNA samples from both. No promises were made, only that a strong resemblance had been noticed. Carol was numb. After years of false hope, she had taught herself not to believe too quickly. Jim agreed to the sample, but was emotionally detached. "We've been through this before," he said. "Hope hurts more than certainty." The lab process took 11 days. On the 12th, the results arrived. A kilench eges, het shazalekos parental match. Rebecca Lorne was Amanda Whitmore. What followed was a delicate coordination of legal, psychological, and family support efforts. Authorities couldn't simply walk into Amanda's school and declare her found. She was 15. She had no memory of her past and believed she was someone else entirely. Her reality was built on lies she had never chosen. The first step was to ensure her safety. Amanda was taken into protective custody under the pretense of a child welfare matter. She was confused, frightened. Margaret, Elaine, was arrested the same day under charges of fraud and child abduction. Amanda was kept from seeing her until after a full psychological evaluation could be completed. She asked one question repeatedly: "Am I in trouble?" Counselors were assigned. Psychologists began the difficult process of unspooling years of misinformation. Amanda was shown childhood photos, ones she couldn't remember. She was introduced to her birth name slowly. She was told that she had been missing, that her real parents had never stopped looking for her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat, staring at a photo of herself at 6 years old, holding a stuffed rabbit she didn't remember owning. "I don't know her," she whispered. "She's not me." But over the days that followed, pieces of her memory began to resurface. A porch swing, the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen, a boy, her brother, handing her a flower, a song her mother used to hum. One afternoon, while flipping through a photo album given to her by authorities, Amanda paused on an image of herself in a yellow sundress. "That's mine," she said. "I had a dream about that dress. I think I called it my lucky dress." She looked up, eyes welling. "Is that really me?" For Carol and Jim, the day Amanda agreed to meet them was one of breathless anticipation and overwhelming anxiety. They were warned it would not be a happy reunion. Not yet. Amanda needed time, boundaries, and the space to reclaim her identity on her terms. Still, when Carol walked into the visitation room, she saw her daughter's eyes, older, guarded, unfamiliar, but hers. "Hi, sweetheart," Carol said softly, tears already falling. Amanda didn't rush into her arms. She didn't say Mom, but she didn't leave either. She just looked at Carol for a long moment and whispered, "I think I used to know you." And for Carol, that was enough to begin. The world watched with stunned fascination as the story of Amanda Whitmore's discovery spread through news cycles like wildfire. For decades, missing children cases had often ended in heartbreak or permanent mystery. Amanda's was a rare glimmer of hope, a living answer to a question that had long been buried. But what the headlines didn't capture was the complicated, fragile aftermath unfolding behind closed doors. Amanda, still adjusting to being called by a name she didn't remember, remained under the care of a state-appointed trauma recovery team. Her memories of her early childhood were fractured like shards of glass, scenes without sequence, emotions without context. She remembered a house with soft green walls, a boy who made her laugh, a lullaby hummed by a woman with warm hands. But just as vivid were the more recent memories of Elaine, who had raised her with gentle rules and a quiet, structured life. Elaine, who told her stories about being chosen. Elaine, who had said her birth family didn't want her. "She told me I was her miracle," Amanda told her therapist one afternoon. She said I saved her life, but I think I was the one who needed saving. For Amanda, the betrayal was profound. Not because Elaine had kidnapped her. Amanda couldn't fully comprehend the legal or moral implications at first, but because she had been lied to about who she was and what she had lost. Trust, already a fragile thing in adolescence, was now nearly impossible to place. Meanwhile, Carol and Jim faced a different kind of agony. Their daughter was back, but not really. Amanda didn't remember their favorite breakfast routine or how Jim used to tie her shoelaces in double knots so she wouldn't trip. She didn't remember Christmas mornings or the names of her cousins or the backyard treehouse Jim had built with his own hands. In one of their early sessions with a family counselor, Carol asked, Do you want to come back with us?" Amanda hesitated. "I don't know you," she replied, "but I want to." It was a start. Daniel, now 20 and living on his own, took longer to re-engage. The guilt he had carried for years, thinking he should have gone with her that morning, had shaped his entire adolescence. He had told himself over and over that if he had walked with her to the end of the street, none of this would have happened. When Amanda wrote him her first letter from the recovery center, it was short. "Hi, I'm not sure what to say. I don't really remember you, but I think I want to. I hope that's okay." "Amanda," Daniel cried when he read it. The road to healing was slow and uncertain. Amanda remained in the Chicago area under protective guardianship for nearly a year. During that time, she underwent intensive therapy, memory recovery sessions, and media protection. Reporters hounded the case. Tabloids printed distorted versions of her story. One article claimed she had returned to her parents with open arms, a headline that hurt more than helped. In truth, Amanda wasn't ready to return, not physically, not emotionally. She kept her identity shielded and chose not to do interviews. She did, however, agree to meet with Carol and Jim regularly under the supervision of therapists, allowing trust to rebuild, moment by moment. One breakthrough came unexpectedly, during a visit to a botanical garden arranged by Amanda's counselor. As they strolled through a row of lavender plants, Amanda stopped suddenly. "I know this smell," she said. "This was in my old room." Carol smiled, wiping her eyes. "Yes, you had a lavender nightlight. We used to call it your dream light." Amanda looked down, her voice small. "Did I like to draw flowers?" "You did," Jim said, his voice catching. "You used to give them names. You had a rose named Maggie." "I still name them," Amanda whispered. "I didn't know why." She didn't move closer. She didn't reach for their hands. But in that moment, a tiny crack opened in the wall between them. As the months passed, Amanda began to form her own picture of who she was, not just a girl with two names, not just a case on TV, but a human being rebuilding from the ruins of a stolen childhood. She began writing journals, poetry, even short stories. One poem, shared with her counselor and later published anonymously, read, "I am two girls in one frame, a ghost and a photograph, a truth with no memory, a name whispered back to me." Elaine Rourke's trial had already concluded. She had been sentenced and imprisoned at a federal facility, her appeals denied. Amanda was given the choice to confront her, to visit or send a letter. She refused. "I don't want to hate her," she told her counselor, "but I don't want to see her face again. I need to be my own person now." Legally, Amanda reclaimed her original name in 1994, but socially, she chose to go by Amanda Lorne Whitmore, a gesture, she said, of honoring every piece of myself, even the ones I didn't choose. By the time she was 16, Amanda had moved in with a foster family in Georgia. Not her birth family, not the strangers who raised her, but a carefully chosen home near Athens where she could slowly reintegrate without pressure. Carol and Jim visited frequently. Daniel, now in college, started showing her old home videos, narrating them with a soft, joking tone that made Amanda smile. One night, during a visit to the family's home, Amanda stood quietly in the doorway of her old bedroom. The furniture had changed, the walls had been painted, but her childhood bookshelf still stood in the corner, untouched. She walked over and picked up a worn book, The Secret Garden, and opened to the inside cover. It read, "To Amanda, dream big and never stop exploring. Love, Daddy." She traced her fingers over the ink. "Do you remember it?" Jim asked gently from behind. Amanda didn't speak. She just nodded, faintly, and for the first time she walked forward and hugged him. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was hers. In the years following Amanda's reappearance, life didn't return to normal. It reshaped itself entirely. There was no guidebook for what came next. No therapist, counselor, or family support center had ever encountered a case quite like hers. A girl presumed dead, found alive under a false name, torn between two lives, one forgotten and one built on lies. The media coverage eventually faded, but Amanda's journey to healing was just beginning. By the time she turned 17, Amanda had begun to speak in public, not to cameras or news anchors, but at small community events focused on trauma recovery and missing children. She never told her full story, never revealed her identity, but she offered something just as powerful: presence. "I was lost once," she said quietly during a support group session, "but not in the way people think. I wasn't in a cave or a basement. I was lost in plain sight. I was a kid hiding inside a new name, and even I didn't know I was missing." Her words struck people, parents of missing children, survivors of identity trauma, and counselors who had seen similar shadows but never heard them spoken aloud. Amanda had found a voice, one that didn't need to scream to be heard. Her relationship with her biological family continued to evolve, slowly and sometimes awkwardly. Carol and Jim had started attending family therapy alongside Amanda, learning how to listen without expectations, to love without trying to repair too quickly. The moments they shared were quiet, reading books together, cooking Amanda's favorite childhood meals, or simply sitting in silence on the porch swing where she had once played. Daniel, once her older brother, now often said he felt more like a cousin or a friend. "We're writing a new history," he said during a recorded awareness seminar. "The old one isn't gone, but we're not trying to live inside it anymore. We're building something forward." Amanda kept her legal name, Amanda Lorne Whitmore, but she didn't move back into her childhood home. She chose instead to live with a foster guardian close to Athens, someone she trusted deeply, someone trained in trauma recovery who provided support without suffocation. She finished high school quietly and enrolled in a nearby community college under a different last name. Privacy remained her shield, even as she began writing about her life. At age 19, Amanda published a collection of essays under a pseudonym. The book, The Girl in the Third Row, was a raw and poetic exploration of memory, identity, and survival. It never explicitly revealed her story, but the themes were unmistakable. A girl sees herself in an old yearbook photo. A name feels like a sweater that doesn't quite fit. A family waits in a house with lavender walls and an empty swing. The book gained quiet acclaim, not for its fame, but for its voice. Readers described it as achingly honest and hauntingly beautiful. Survivors of trauma began writing to the publisher, thanking the anonymous author for giving them language for their own broken pieces. Amanda never publicly confirmed her authorship. She didn't need to. In her personal life, Amanda remained cautious but curious. She kept a small circle of friends, mostly people who didn't know her past or didn't care. She once told her therapist that she liked the feeling of being just a regular person who got nervous before tests or laughed too hard at dumb jokes. Normalcy was its own kind of miracle. Elaine Rourke, her abductor, remained incarcerated. Amanda never reached out. The prison sent her periodic updates as required by law, but she declined to receive them. When asked in therapy if she ever thought about visiting Elaine, Amanda shook her head slowly. "She's a chapter I've finished," she said, "but the book isn't over." What did linger, however, were the questions. How did Elaine target Amanda? Why that morning? Did she stalk the family? Did anyone help her? Despite the conviction, the full picture of Amanda's abduction remained incomplete. Elaine had left no diary, no confessional letter. Her motivations, at least those she shared, were muddled, part delusion, part loneliness, part misplaced maternal instinct. Experts debated whether she had suffered from a psychological condition or simply manipulated her way through life with surgical precision. For Amanda, the details mattered less than the outcome. "I don't think I'll ever understand her," she once said. "But I've learned I don't have to. Understanding doesn't equal healing. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop trying to solve the past and start choosing your future." And that's what she did. She chose to study psychology. She chose to speak at youth conferences. She chose to become an advocate for children navigating identity loss and complex trauma. She never wanted to be defined by what happened to her, but she wasn't afraid of it either. One particularly emotional moment came when Amanda was invited to speak at a vigil held in Athens for National Missing Children's Day. She stood on the small stage in front of hundreds of flickering candles, all held by parents, siblings, and strangers who had known loss. She looked out over the crowd and took a shaky breath. "I was once one of those names on a flyer," she began. "I was a face fading on a bulletin board. I was missing, not just from my family, but from myself." She paused. "But I was also found, not just by law enforcement, not by a miracle, but by people who refused to forget. People who held on even when the world moved on. People who believed that memory matters, that love matters, that names matter." Her voice trembled just once. "To those still waiting," she said, "don't let time convince you to stop hoping. Some of us are still out here, trying to find our way back." The crowd stood silent. Then, as if on cue, the wind picked up ever so slightly, rustling the trees behind the candlelit park. And somewhere in the back row, someone whispered, "Welcome home." Amanda's life, in the years that followed her rediscovery, became a quiet testament to endurance, not only of her own strength, but of the relentless love of those who refused to let her story fade. Her 21st birthday came and went without much fanfare. She spent it with her foster guardian, a small group of friends, and, for the first time, Carol, Jim, and Daniel together under the same roof. The gathering wasn't perfect. There were long pauses, awkward laughter, too many questions left unsaid, but it was real, and real was more than enough. Daniel gave her a simple gift that day, a framed photo of the two of them as children, taken just days before she vanished. They were sitting in the backyard, Amanda holding a popsicle, Daniel grinning with a missing tooth. "I kept it all these years," he said. "I thought maybe one day you'd want to remember this part." Amanda stared at it for a long time. "I don't remember it," she admitted. Daniel nodded. "It's okay. I'll remember for both of us." For Amanda, life wasn't about reclaiming what was lost. It was about creating what never had the chance to be. In college, she excelled in psychology, focusing on trauma-informed care and childhood development. Her professors described her as sharp, empathetic, and fiercely determined. She never shared her story in class, never used it for sympathy or advantage. Her work spoke for itself. By the time she graduated, she had already been offered a place in a graduate program and a part-time research assistantship with a non-profit supporting recovered and long-term missing children. She accepted both. But even as her academic and advocacy work flourished, Amanda struggled in quieter, more invisible ways. Trust didn't come easily. Intimacy was difficult. Romantic relationships rarely lasted more than a few months. Crowds overwhelmed her. Certain sounds, a car idling outside, a knock on the door at night, would trigger panic responses she couldn't explain. Her therapist diagnosed her with complex PTSD, something Amanda had already suspected, but she didn't hide from it. She faced it with the same quiet resilience that had carried her through every strange chapter of her life. "I'm not broken," she once said during a filmed panel. "I'm just learning how to be whole in a different way." Public interest in her case surged again briefly when a documentary team requested permission to produce a short film on child abductions in America. Amanda declined to appear, but agreed to consult anonymously, providing insight into how recovery can often be more complicated than rescue. She was cautious about her story becoming a spectacle. She didn't want to be a poster child, a symbol, or a tragedy-turned-triumph narrative that skipped over the parts that still hurt, because some days still did. There were days when she felt like a stranger in every room, when memories came too fast or didn't come at all, when she mourned a childhood she could barely recall. There were mornings she still woke in sweat, gasping, convinced she was back in that house, under a name that never belonged to her. But then there were other mornings, better ones, days when she'd meet her brother for coffee and talk about books or favorite music, days when she'd sit with Carol and plant flowers in the backyard, slowly rebuilding the bond that had once been severed by fate, days when she'd teach young kids how to name their emotions in therapy, how to express fear and confusion without shame. "I used to think I was a ghost," she wrote in her private journal, "that maybe I never really existed. But now, I think I'm just someone who got lost in the woods and found a way out." One summer, Amanda returned to the neighborhood where it all began. The old house was still there, though repainted and resold. The swing was gone. The sidewalk hopscotch squares had long faded, but the trees still stood, tall and quiet. She walked to the corner where her bike had once been found. Nothing had changed, and everything had. She sat on the curb and closed her eyes. "I forgive you," she whispered. Not to Elaine, not to herself, but to the missing years, to the emptiness, to the silence. Forgiveness, she had learned, wasn't about erasing pain. It was about choosing not to carry it every single day. That fall, Amanda began writing a second book. Not essays this time, but fiction. A novel about a girl who disappears into a different name and learns how to find her way back, not through memory, but through courage, curiosity, and the quiet pull of home. The manuscript was titled "The Name in the Mirror." In an interview she later agreed to give, under conditions of anonymity, the journalist asked her one final question. If you could go back to that morning in 1985 and stop what happened, would you? Amanda thought for a long time. "No," she said finally, "not because I wanted it to happen, but because I know who I am now. And I'm proud of that. I'm not just what was taken. I'm what I've built since." The interview ended, the tape recorder clicked off, and Amanda walked away, into the sunlight, into her future. Some stories don't end with clear answers. Amanda Whitmore's journey wasn't one of perfect justice or fairy tale reunions. It was a story stitched from grief, confusion, survival, and the fragile thread of identity, a thread that stretched across time, through different names, through silence, and ultimately back to the light. She wasn't the same little girl who vanished on that summer day in 1985, and maybe she never would be, but in many ways she became something more, a voice for the voiceless, a survivor who refused to be defined by someone else's version of her life. We often ask ourselves what we would do in a crisis, how we would react if someone we loved disappeared without a trace. Would we keep searching? Would we hold on to hope? Would we recognize them if we saw them again, changed, older, scared? For Carol and Jim Whitmore, the answer was yes. They kept a light in the window long after the world told them it was time to let go. For Daniel, it was yes. He waited with quiet loyalty, a brother frozen in memory. And for Amanda, it was yes. She chose to come back, even when the path was unclear, even when the memories didn't match the people who loved her. Her story is not just about a disappearance. It's about reappearance, reconstruction, the messy, beautiful, painful process of reclaiming yourself. And now we leave you with a question. What makes us who we are? Is it the name we're given? The home we grow up in? The people who raise us? Or is it something more? Something that survives even when our world is rewritten, something inside us that whispers, "You are still here." Amanda's name changed, her address changed, her memories scattered, but at her core she remained, resilient, watchful, becoming. She is living proof that even the most twisted paths can lead home. So, next time you walk through a school hallway, flip through an old yearbook, pass by someone who looks oddly familiar, ask yourself, what stories lie behind those faces? What names have been forgotten? And who among us is still waiting to be found? If this story moved you, we encourage you to share it. Leave a comment below, tell us your thoughts, your questions. And remember, every time we speak their names, every time we listen, every time we look again, we make it harder for anyone to disappear forever, because behind every missing face is a story, and some stories come back to life.